Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are having a great Tuesday. I'm doing this video, or at least I'm recording this video a little bit before I go to work. But I wanted to talk about something. It's kind of, has to do with Minnesota, but or at least Minnesota sports. And kind of how cursed we are as a sports area, sports state. But before I get into that, if you are new to the channel and you love hockey, if you're new to hockey in general and you found your way here, I'm very, very happy that you're here. If you love the sport like I do, excuse me. It would be awesome and greatly appreciated of you to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button. Also, if you want to be notified anytime future videos are uploaded, you can hit the little bell, and that will notify you anytime future videos are uploaded. So, Minnesota sports in general. Obviously, we have the Twins, we have the Vikings, we have the Timberwolves, and we have the Wild. And we are to say that we're cursed when it comes to sports, I think is very, very true, because we have no luck. We have no luck when it comes to sports. And I can show here. Now, we start out, we have the Minnesota Twins. They came in to Major League Baseball in 1961. They were the Washington Senators. But they came to Minnesota here in 1961. Now, they made the World Series in their fourth year. But they lost that series to the LA Dodgers 4-3. They didn't make another appearance in the World Series until 1987 against the St. Louis Cardinals. That one they won. They won 4-3. I remember that very, very well. And how cool I thought it was. It was so neat. Like, hey, Minnesota finally got a championship. Maybe this is a good thing. It was, and riding that high, it was awesome. They didn't get back to the World Series again until 1991 against the Atlanta Braves, and they won that one 4-3. Now that one, Minnesota that year had a pretty good thing going on. The Twins were in the World Series. The North Stars had just played in the Stanley Cup Final. We had the Final Four. The NCAA Final Four was held here, and the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl was held at the Metrodome. That was all in 1991. So I mean, that was a pretty good year for sports when it came to sports here in Minnesota. The Twin Cities had it all that year. Unfortunately, the North Stars didn't win the Stanley Cup. But the Twins won the World Series 4-3 over Atlanta. So, we're like, cool. Those are really the only bright spots. The only true bright spots in Minnesota sports. Because then we get to the Minnesota Vikings, who, oh, God, let me count the ways how this team disappoints us. They end up in Super Bowl IV, and they lose to Kansas City. Now, mind you, they were heavily favored in that. They were heavily favored in that Super Bowl, and they got destroyed 23-7. They get back to the Super Bowl in Super Bowl VIII. This is during the Purple People Eater days. That's what the Vikings defense was called in the 1970s, was the Purple People Eaters. They get back to the Super Bowl. They get back in Super Bowl 8 against the Miami Dolphins, and they lose 24-7. So much for the Purple People Eaters there. They then, the next year, get back to the Super Bowl. So their second straight trip to the Super Bowl against the Pittsburgh Steelers. What happens? They lose 16-6. And then 2 years after that, so 3 Super Bowl trips in the span of 4 years, they play the Oakland Raiders in Super Bowl 11, and they get stomped 32-14. Now, the Vikings have had many NFC Championship game appearances between, their last Super Bowl appearance and their, and they can't get there. They can't seem to win. They might get to the NFC Championship game, and then that's where they fall flat on their face. They've had some close games. Couple of those games they probably should have won. I know 1998 was one they should have won. They should have won that game, and with the team that they had, I think they probably could have won the Super Bowl if they'd have gotten there. But they didn't get there. Our place kicker hadn't missed a field goal all year. And when does he miss his first one of the year? In the game that would have put us in the Super Bowl. He missed that field goal, and we ended up losing to the Atlanta Falcons. And it just, that one was probably one of the more heartbreaking ones. The other one of the other really heartbreaking ones was against the New Orleans Saints when, that was another game we honestly should have won. And we somehow, when it comes to big moments, especially when it comes to the Vikings, when it comes to big moments, they choke. As the wife hollers from the other room, choke! Yes, they choke. And it's frustrating. It is so frustrating. Because honestly, this is a team, I don't think they'll ever win a Super Bowl in my lifetime. I mean, they haven't even been, I wasn't even alive the last time the Vikings were in the Super Bowl. So, that's the Minnesota Vikings for you. Then we get to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Well, this is a team they've been garbage basically since they came into the NBA. They came into the NBA in 1989. I think they have had one time they've made the conference final. And they lost to Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, and the LA Lakers. That was the deepest run they've ever had. And that was during the Lakers that was during one of the more recent Laker heydays, with Shaq and Kobe and those guys. So the Timberwolves, they've never been to the NBA Finals. There's never any expectations with them. When the NBA season starts, there isn't any. There's no real expectations for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So, we don't really have to expect anything. Then we get to the Minnesota Wild. The team that I follow. I mean, I follow the Twins. I follow the Vikings. The Wild is the team that I follow, the closest. And they too. I mean, they have, they've made the conference finals once. They lost to the Anaheim Mighty Ducks in what could be considered one of the most boring series of all time. It's the tail end of the dead puck era, where goals were just goals. What were goals? What do you mean? That's how we win. We're supposed to score goals? Nobody knew how to score goals back in the early 2000s. The Wild were playing the neutral zone trap. Their coach was of course Jacques Lemaire, who used the neutral zone trap to win the Stanley Cup with New Jersey in 1995. So I mean, it worked. But Anaheim did that too. So two teams that play the trap. Yeah, some of the most boring games I had ever watched. Of course, pulling for the Wild, obviously. But, you know, they ended up getting swept. And the Vikings, or the Vikings, the Wild, they've never gotten back there. They've never gotten that far again. They've made the second round a couple of times. And they've lost. I know they've lost twice to Chicago in the second round. I think they lost once to St. Louis in the second round. But it just, there's not a whole ton of expectations there either. Or at least there kind of is. They're a team that, you know, a lot like the Vikings. They're a team that is just good enough to make the playoffs. Once they make the playoffs, they clinched the playoff spot. Well, they're done. Yep, they're done. They're done. You know, it's over. Don't bother. They're not winning anything. And it's just, you know, it's kind of like the Twins. The Twins sometimes they make the playoffs, and not only can the Twins not win a playoff series, they can't even win a playoff game. They have literally lost, I believe, like 17 straight playoff games that they've appeared in. Now, I mean, figure that out. You know, how many postseasons is that? 17 straight playoff game losses. So even when the Twins have had a good year, they get to the playoffs, they're done. I don't know why we are this cursed when it comes to sports, because I look at the Boston area and New England. They don't have a bad team out there. You know, they know how to win championships, make playoff appearances. I mean, the Bruins, the Patriots, the Red Sox, the Celtics, you know, they're all good teams. They always have good teams, and they've won a lot of championships. Stark contrast to Minnesota. We just can't. We can't win. We can't. No matter what we do, no matter what sport it is, we can't. We can't get over the hump, and it's frustrating as a Minnesota sports fan that, you know, that you're just good enough. I mean, I've said this with the Vikings for the longest time, that, you know, I just one time have a bad year, finish last in the NFL so you can get the number 1 overall draft pick and get a quarterback, because the Vikings don't have a quarterback. You know, people say Kirk Cousins is a decent quarterback. No, he's not. Kirk Cousins is not a quarterback that can get the Vikings to do anything. And so that's been frustrating. And, you know, I don't have a lot of expectations for the Minnesota Vikings. You know, I mean, we're going to be coming into a Viking season here coming up in the next. I think training camp is going to start here, I think, maybe in the next couple of weeks. Something like that. Well, what expectations are there? I don't have any. I'm not expecting them to do anything. I don't expect them to make the playoffs. And even if they did make the playoffs, they're not going to do anything. They're going to get into the wild card round, and they're going to get destroyed, because it's the Minnesota way. Especially when it comes to the Vikings. It's the Minnesota way. You get destroyed in everything that you do. Same for the Minnesota Wild. I've said for years, I wish because the Wild have never really had a bad year where they have finished in the bottom 5 of the NHL. And honestly, I would not mind if just one time, have a couple of bad years. I mean, even if it's just 1 year, have a couple of bad years. Get into the draft lottery. Especially if there is a Connor Bedard type player. That's when I want to see him be bad. So they got a chance at a really good player. But again, they're just good enough to make the playoffs. I mean, they're fun to watch. I love watching the Wild. And obviously, I pull for the Wild. But I know when they're... Because I mean, just this last year, even getting toward the end of the season, when they were in first place, when they overtook Dallas and Colorado and had first place in the division, I still didn't have a lot of expectations for them. I did not think they would end up hanging on to win the division, which I was right. And even going into the playoffs, I thought, if somehow they maintain first place, I'd give them a chance against Seattle, because if they would have played Seattle, if they'd have won the division, they would have played Seattle. Now, the way Seattle played, the Wild probably would have lost to them too. But not winning the division, they were either going to play Colorado or Dallas, and I didn't think they could beat either one. And they played Dallas, and we were right. They couldn't beat Dallas. I honestly think they could have. Because the Dallas Stars couldn't do anything 5-on-5 against the Wild. They couldn't do anything. But the Wild couldn't score either. Dallas's power play literally torched the Minnesota Wild. Where the Minnesota Wild power play, garbage. Didn't help. Didn't do anything. They lost 4-2. And coming into this next season, the next 2 seasons for the Wild, they are buried in cap hell. Over $14.5 million of dead cap space is on the books for the Minnesota Wild for the next 2 years. Do I expect anything? Do I expect the Wild to really do anything? No. Will they be a bad team? I don't think they'll be a bad team. I really don't think they'll be a bad team. But if they are in a chase for a playoff spot, I'm not going to have any expectations for them. Even if they make the playoffs next year, do I think they're going to win a round? No. No, not a chance. Because they're not good enough. And when it comes down to it, when it comes to Minnesota sports as a whole, basically since 1991, Minnesota sports are just not good enough. They can't get over the hump. Anytime they have any kind of decent team where it looks like they could make some noise, they choke. Every single time. The Vikings, the Wild, the Twins, Timberwolves, yeah. They're lucky if they even make the playoffs, once every 10 years, basically. But there's whenever I don't have any expectations for our sports teams here. I just don't, because they're never bad enough to be able to get a good high draft pick, especially in the NFL or the NHL. They're never bad enough to be able to get that top flight draft pick. But they're not good enough to make a playoff run. to truly make a playoff run. And that's what's frustrating about being a Minnesota sports fan. Because we're never bad enough to get that generational talent draft pick. But we're never good enough to be able to, make a run. Whether it's to the Super Bowl, whether it's to the World Series, whether it's to the Stanley Cup final, it doesn't matter. They're not bad enough to be in the draft lottery or be able to get that high draft pick, but they're never good enough to win win in the playoffs. And that is what's frustrating about being a Minnesota sports fan. And basically, since 1991, the Minnesota Twins, of the 4 major sports teams, Minnesota Twins are the only team that's done anything. And look how long that's been. 1991. It's very frustrating to be a Minnesota sports fan, but I'm pretty sure, I kind of half wonder, and I'd love to know what you guys think, wherever you guys are at. Do you guys have a similar sports curse where you just, when you have expectations, they fall flat on their face, or they choke, or they're just never bad enough to get that really high draft pick? I'd love to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments section. And and if there's anyone from Minnesota that tunes into this video, you feel the pain. You feel the pain of being a Minnesota sports fan. And it just, it's brutal. It's brutal to be a Minnesota sports fan, because we're not allowed to win anything. We're not allowed to be any good. We're not allowed to be, we're not allowed to do anything worthwhile. We're not allowed to have that. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Let me know if you're in a sports area that is basically in a sports purgatory, like we are here in Minnesota. I'd love to know if some of you guys are in that same boat. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Hit that subscribe button if you really enjoyed it. Also, click the little bell. It'll turn on notifications, and you'll be notified anytime future videos are uploaded. And yeah, so I thought this was kind of a little fun to talk about, and talk about the curse of being a Minnesota sports fan. I'll see you guys later.